Right, welcome everyone to the Cluster Addons meeting. It's the 11th of June. Justin just told me he has an agenda item for today. Maybe before we start, I think the last meetings we didn't do so well on taking notes. Maybe we can try to do this as a team exercise today, so people don't have to watch the entire thing later on. Okay, Justin, you wanted to summarize what Lee and you were talking about.
Yes, wonderful. So Lee, feel free to chime in wherever I misrepresent or whatever. There are two open PRs. I think to date we've been encouraging people to submit ideas or proposals for Strawman proposals for how the add-on operators or how add-on management should actually work. We have two PRs that are up there. As we've discussed in previous weeks, they're actually not really that different. Both of them use operators. One of them uses the operator SDK. One of them uses Kube Builder. Both of them build on the underlying controller runtime library now because operator SDK is built on that. So Lee and I discussed how we would move forwards, and we agreed that we would merge one of them. Lee was gracious enough to accept that we would start with mine, and then Lee would add all the good stuff that I glossed over, such as, for example, like finding the correct IP address for the DNS service, and all sorts of great stuff which is in Lee's PR but not in the one which I put up. And so the proposal or the agreement that we reached and the proposal for the group is that we merge that one PR, that we then add lots of the missing functionality to it, and basically see where it goes. We know we have a lot of things like in these doc that we want to talk about and discuss and prototype, and so we feel like some code would be a good way forwards. And this does not preclude anyone that has a genius idea from proposing yet another PR. It's just a way to sort of move forwards and start getting some actual concrete code going, and we can actually see how these things feel. Is that a fair representation, Lee? Cool.
Yeah. We had some discussion on quite a few interesting points. Once we were beyond like, okay, let's merge the operator thing and let's submit some patches to just get it in the right place, which, by the way, I think Jeff, was it, that had the patch for kubectl or like kind of customized style patch support. We talked a lot about how we can get some of these higher order needs for add-on management, like beyond what we have, which is just applying YAML files to the cluster. How do we parameterize and expose options and different flavors of things to people so that they can easily configure them and at install time and cluster modification time. Realistically, the tools that are going to be trying to manage these add-ons are going to be things like kubeadm and kops out of the gate, since we have contributors from those places joining these calls. If anyone else wants to help with kubespray or kubecorn or other places implementing add-on interfaces, we would love to chat and make sure that the things we're proposing are not distasteful. But I jumped on the kubeadm call last week. We talked about shelling out to kubectl. We talked about using customize, and it's kind of quasi like packet structure, formalizing that a little bit, and with some future work to get that into an OCI signable package so that people can distribute them properly. And hopefully I'm clearly explaining in a way that's able to be followed along. But yeah, Justin and I talked a lot about using customize in order to install these operators, and also using those same libraries to enable operators to operate in a declarative fashion. But then, use whatever code to modify those declarations from the customized packages, such as in the case that you would need to do for core DNS. And then the other thing we mentioned was an idea that a lot of people independently came up with, and one that I think we're all really starting to like, which is that building into the pattern that Justin's been working on, and this is applicable to anybody's POCs as well, is just having an early exit convergence for the operators that are responsible for installing things. It gives us a binary that's not just going to like need to sit around for forever, but also can be applied for low resource use cases, like ARM clusters and things, where you don't want, something eating up CPU cycles, checking on what it installed, and you're only concerned about enforcing that at cluster lifecycle. So that in the add-on management document is called the ad hoc runtime use case. And many people have commented that it's possible to retrofit that behavior onto existing operators to where they could time out if something good hasn't happened, and they could exit if something good has happened. And then that could be run as a job by an installer instead of as a deployment. So that was
running it outside the cluster on the client side, essentially.
No. Well, I mean, I think that it would be more in line with the same deployment pattern. Like it's a more similar abstraction to just use a job with the early exit flag. That's very similar to using a deployment. It's actually deploying the operator. And then the client side code could then determine, hey, this job exited properly within the necessary period. Like, let me just clean up the RBAC that was temporary for it.
Okay, so the service account would be temporary for that.
Yeah, I think the job could clean up its own pods, and then we could use the job GC features, and then, yeah, the service account would be revoked by the installer. So that way it's least privilege.
Okay, anyway, yeah, I mean, it sounds, like implementation detail, but actually, yeah, anyway.
We kind of figured that, like, from an EKS cuddle perspective, right, that, like, you wouldn't want to, like, vendor in an operator. Just, like, that can't happen at build time. Because, like, if a user wants to not install things or install things, then you need to, like, vendor in these other code bases or pull a binary down onto a machine. It just didn't feel so right.
From a technical perspective, not necessarily a concern, but it's I think it's a separate matter. Anyway, but like broadly, it sounds like a good idea to keep going forward. It's just that it doesn't necessarily. I'm not entirely convinced it has to run as a job inside the cluster at all. It seems like an unnecessary layer of interaction. But
I think what's exciting to me is that we think that the same like basic code pattern can be like sliced in different ways. So like some people, my bias is I want to run it continuously because I want status monitoring. I think Lee says he wants to run it as a job, and I think you're saying you want to run it outside the cluster. And I think that we might be able to have the same like core body of code that actually, is wrapped in different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I absolutely agree on that part. It's just, totally.
Would you shell out to that binary when running off that?
I mean, it could be anything really. I mean, personally, from a KS control perspective, I mean, I don't particularly care at this stage. So it could be anything really. It's not of a particular concern as such, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like we can discuss separately. Anyway, for specifics of EKS control, I think we shouldn't have to worry about the fact of whether the consumer needs to shell out, call as a library vendor in or whatever. I don't think it needs to be discussed at this stage. It seems like an implementation detail that is less relevant to overall architecture.
When I say that kind of the early implementations are likely going to involve depending on kubectl from your cluster lifecycle tool, does that make you feel anything at all?
I mean, it's as irrelevant as the other detail.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
With regard to using customize, which is not so much an implementation detail,
right.
like how do you feel about that personally?
I mean, my personal feeling about that particular detail shouldn't really matter to this particular thing. I don't think. I think.
We want to keep in mind, right, that like
Yeah, sure.
the
So
goal is to build a shared interface, right?
yeah,
So
I think.
is that something you would want?
I think. I mean, it'd probably be fine for the case control project. You know, it's. Yeah, I think it's important at this stage to make progress towards something that satisfies broad use cases, and particular details of how it's being consumed downstream is a separate topic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for the comments there. Actually, that makes me feel good.
Yeah, it's just like I think the architectural pattern is important, that they should be able to run as a thing that just does a job and goes away and doesn't sit around, doesn't have RBAC implications and all those things to itself. So we don't end up with a Taylor problem, which, you know, the Helm people haven't quite solved yet. As in, maybe they did, but it's not part of Helm that everybody uses. You know, I think there's that sort of common problem that we should try to avoid. The fact of just a sort of conceptual fact of a piece of software requiring another piece of software to be able to run in the first place is kind of a challenging thing, because how many extra pieces of software do you need?
Yes, I like that you brought this up, which is why in the add-on management document, I'm careful and loud about how operators are one implementation and one pattern. I think that moving forward with a lot of this direction that Justin and I talked about, I've been really emphasizing on all of the needs, like having operators that install things doesn't solve the problem of needing to install and configure the operators. And
Right.
so focusing on installing on like the packaging portion and the mechanisms by which the installers like kubeadm, kopc, ks-ctl, kubespray, like how they get those things into the cluster in a configured and versioned way. I think if you solve that problem, then people can decide whether or not their thing needs an operator. Because there are certainly, like, I could see us distributing WeaveNet in a way where we were only using customize and overlays. I don't think that needs an operator component in there necessarily.
Right.
But we should try it, right? We should see what, like, there may be some cluster specific things, since it's a networking component where it needs subnets or something. But yeah, or like DNS introspection or whatever. But
I mean, it would be from the net use case perspective. I think it would be beneficial to the net to have high-level parameters exposed through some sort of meaningful structure. At the moment, a bunch of VNet parameters happen to be environment variables on a given container, and they have high-level meaning to the end user. For example, being able to set the MTU. You currently have to set MTU by setting Vive MTU environment variable on Vive pod and not the Vive and network policy pod, because there's the network policy sidecar. So, you know, these kinds of things, or well, the password we do handle in some way through the secret, but there was something else where, you know, things are buried down as environment variables or flags or other things, and being able to expose them as a more high-level concept would be potentially helpful to the end user.
I haven't used Kustomize enough to know whether or not those things are fully feasible as overlays. Things like adding specific flags from a patch, since that is a list type. I think you could probably do it with the JSON patch portion of Kustomize, but yeah, that's
But that kind of becomes tricky, right? Because now you have to use a special feature that is dedicated to certain use cases.
so it might be easier, right, to like have an operator, or it might be possible to use with just customize. And that's kind of what I was highlighting, is that like when you were talking about having that extra piece of software that has extra privileges that needs to run somewhere, potentially in the cluster, you're talking about all of these complexities in that portion of the abstraction. And I agree that there are many portions of that that are large trade-offs that many people will find undesirable. So with regard to the early exit discussion, which is having that software not running all the time as an option, and also just not even needing it, and still being able to benefit from the packaging that was built in mind, and the tooling and the libraries around that that expose those component configs to the user of the installer. I think we can get to a healthy place where this, like, we actually have an ecosystem and recommendations that we can point people to. Justin, are you following with what I'm saying?
Yes, I am more optimistic about operators in the long run. I feel like they have long run value, but I also don't think that we will. I think my way of moving forwards is to code more than like code and explore the space. And
yeah, I would like to get the mechanisms actually working. And Lubomir from last week's Kubernetes discussion suggested that we do this in a binary, probably in the add-on operators repo, as a POC. And then if we build it that way, then it's vendorable. So
yeah, and one of the things I guess is like, I feel like eventually we want Weave specifically, for example, to have a CRD that is versioned and describes its configuration. And today, an operator would be the thing that translates that to Weave. Maybe in a future world, Weave could itself consume the CRD.
Yeah,
and I don't know whether you would still need another portion, whether or not some sort of Weave operator, even if it's not like a generic operator type thing. Like, do we end up with an operator anyway, like some sort of administrative central component for Weave? So,
yeah, but, I mean,
that's what we.
Yeah, it's like I mean, from my perspective, I think it's like case by case basis. Certain types of add-ons do need a permanently running operator, and that's perfectly justifiable. But it's just like broadly, just about anything. I think I struggle to apply that concept.
I think that CRDs in specificity are a trade-off. Like reducing the complexity of an application into something that's specific for it can be a very helpful abstraction.
Yeah.
And it's not like the other objects that are necessary to run the thing are not introspectable, but like sometimes just as like somebody who operates a cluster, you're just like, just show me the secrets, right? Or like, it does complicate RBAC. So
I think one other way to put it, what I'm sort of the same thing that I'm trying to say about the kind of the whole idea of operators for various different use cases is that we shouldn't really keep thinking about operators as things that are permanently running inside a cluster and permanently perform some kind of reconciliation. There should be a way to execute operator logic based on administrator's intent, and not, necessarily automatically, not necessarily controlled through some kind of flag that automates that behavior or not. So being able to sort of say, okay, well, I'd like to go and do this thing now, and I'll execute that operator logic now, and I wouldn't want that to possibly even with a remote chance running somehow without my control. So I think this is a kind of a very, very typical traditional view of enterprise operations folks to this problem. So they wouldn't want to have any chance of changes taking place without their control.
I like very much the way you've expressed that. I think a challenge that is related is the current model well, I guess the challenge is what happens when when an administrator goes and makes a different sort of change behind the scenes, and how do you reconcile sort of the two intents, which is, I guess, so a continuously running operator is a way to effectively say, once you make a change, it effectively gets immediately reverted, or we have a webhook that prevents that change entirely. But we effectively are saying your second intent is just ignored, which is a consistent view, if not a wonderful view. But we have to solve that sort of issue, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Hmm.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, anyway, I wrote down that we chatted about customized packaging improvements and that the group would like to see working installation mechanisms in a POC. And that I don't hear too much dissent between kind of these 4 different viewpoints that we've discussed. Let's see. Just want to make sure that other people feel like they have space to talk. But I did mention it's just kind of like a funny detail, but do you think that like when installers need to put these custom resources into a cluster, that they should be validated before being submitted to the API server, or is that just like a runtime thing? Like KubeADM, should it go and like register all of the CRDs internally and then validate against the CRs, or should we just leave this to the API server? I mean, I suppose installing doesn't make any sense if you don't have a working API server. So just,
I guess you're worried about someone like having a partially one bad CRD and they have to go all the way through the install before they notice that it's bad.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I don't know how hard it is to run validation, like whether you have to do what you said, like register, like bring up etcd and API server and all this stuff and do all that, or whether there's an easier way to just do the validation.
Yeah, it's that's something that component config is supposed to be enabling, and our progress has been very slow. Some of that is on me. So yeah,
it sounds great. It's just like, I don't know how much bring up etcd, as I think we've talked about, like how Kube Builder has those tests that like require etcd, and they're a little bit heavy or problematic, like in terms of the path. And yeah, it's
we're in a very humbling and potentially dangerous place when a contributor who's been around for years starts laughing and blushing when we talk about using API machinery.
It's definitely not something you want to do without regard for the extent of the challenge.
Oh man, this is.
But I think it's certainly technically possible, right, to run that validation, and absolutely. I imagine that it would be great if we can do that one day. But it is also a fairly niche, not niche. Because I'm sure I will do it many times. But it is not the end of the world to like have garbage in, garbage out type semantics.
Yeah. I mean, it would be an improvement from where we are right now, which is like that the user cannot mess with it at all, really. So.
And if they're changing an existing cluster, hopefully then we would validate. We would be able to perform that validation server side.
Something that just makes me think about cluster lifecycle a little bit is that the application and management of these operators is certainly a different phase that should not be tightly coupled with the creation of infrastructure. So I'm not sure how well that fits into the UX of COPS and EKS Cuddle, but in KubeADM we'll likely have an ad hoc phase that you can run with a config. And then it'll just worry about the add-ons themselves. So we do have phases right now that like kind of just are concerned with those bits, and so I think those would naturally change up, and we would start with an alpha phase set. So. Doesn't sound like there's too much concern there. But
it's kind of hard
as an
to
operator with garbage in, garbage out, like, or if you want to add or remove an add-on, that's definitely something where like I want to run the tool again and like have it do the packaging again and have it like implicate them into the cluster again and like do diffs and stuff. So the kubectl apply shell out makes a lot of sense there, but just making sure that it's executable for the user over and over again is going to be something that, like, as soon as there is garbage, like people are going to run that thing 10 times. So, yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, we're 30 minutes in. We've talked about plenty, and I don't have much to add here. I think that we would like to get some POCs working, and then with kind of a medium-term goal to also have implementable KEP just for some of these finer details. That may just be a patch to the existing one. But we're currently in provisional, I think, on the add-ons KEP, so we should probably go through that process. I can own that if nobody else wants to raise their hand.
What are the steps to go from provisional to less provisional?
I think like the verbiage is literally the approvers say it's good. Which, I mean, as far as the KEP goes, and with regard to what we're talking about, we have like way more concrete details now. So we should write those down so people can criticize them in a different forum that's, I guess, not this call. And yeah, I mean, from what we've kind of chatted about and described and a lot of the issues and trade-offs that we've discussed, like this packaging solution using these operators with these encouragements, you know, with regard to kubegilder and this pattern, that all sounds like very concrete implementable details. So and then there's like other states as well, like you can like reject and deprecate KEPs and stuff. So again, just saying aloud and on the recording that us going to an implementable KEP and making these decisions and doesn't prevent anybody from proposing other stuff. Please, we'd like to hear your ideas.
So when you said we would need more POCs, would that mean that we would, as you said earlier, like merge one of the proposals and start documenting it a little bit, and then basically tell people like, this is a known good way to go about this, and now start building your own add-on operators?
I think that's the long-term goal. I'm a little bit wary of saying like this is a known good way until but this is the way. I think as far as I interpret the call, we have agreed that we are going to explore that option, and we are going to try to prove that as a known good way and addresses like the different wrappings around that code, like a job, a long-running operator, and a external.
Sure.
One of the three that we've seen, and I think if we hit those three, I think. And it seems to be valuable if in our opinion, like if in our opinions and the opinions of others, other tooling that it seems to be valuable, then I think we can make that statement that it is a.
Yeah, we can add some vague language in the meantime.
Yes.
Yeah, or some explicit language that says, right, that this is a proof of concept. This is a direction that the add-on project is trying. That, yeah.
I guess I was asking the question to better understand the next steps, and also to figure out like if there were any points where you would need help.
The next steps, from my understanding, are merge Justin's kube builder operator. I submit some of the differences to that operator to clean up any bugs and style things. Get patch support into it. Build a proof of concept for using kubectl with customize and some configuration to install add-ons. So that's a bigger task. And then describe the approach in an implementable KEP that can then be reviewed and hopefully approved by whoever's on the approver list. Honestly, I think, Justin, you might be on that list, right? Since for cluster lifecycle KEPs.
Yes, it felt a bit like self-dealing to approve it, so I didn't know how to cope with being on that list. So
you can make Tim do it when he declares email bankruptcy.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we did all of those things, I think we would have more code to argue about, and code that works. So.
Yeah, I think I was asking the question about concrete next steps and where you need help, because in the first call we had around, I don't know, 50, 60 people. And I think and they all seem to have like a use case for this. So I guess reaching out to them and saying like, okay, this is stuff we already agreed on. Here's a bunch of things. Do you want to get involved and give us your feedback? I think that would, speed up the process maybe a little bit. And it wouldn't be just, Lee, Justin, and Jeff doing the work.
If somebody is interested in doing like some OCI packaging stuff with Customize, that could be a huge area of help. I think that that's kind of a major missing point of that implementation, is that there is no standard packaging around Customize at the moment beyond Git. And Git has a lot of useful and flexible features that I would argue we should keep around, but I think a lot of people working in an enterprise scenario would scoff at using Git for packaging because they want cryptographic verification and the source of things, the provenance of their is that the fancy word that people use? Artifact provenance. So, and and then there's some cluster bundle work in there as well that we chatted about, potentially being able to package up some customize inside of a cluster bundle. I think, Justin, you really liked that idea because there's no external resources necessary. If you have a cluster, you can apply cluster bundle CRs. So
yeah, plenty of good things. I saw some people hid their video. Is that because they wanted to speak? Joe, I'm looking at you.
I was just going to add one thing. This is kind of unrelated, but since you guys were looking at KubeBuilder versus Operator SDK, so I'm the Operator SDK lead. So I think I mentioned this last time, but I can't remember. We started conversation with the KubeBuilder maintainers and controller runtime to figure out how we might want to go about downstreaming KubeBuilder into Operator SDK. So there's another conversation tomorrow at the KubeBuilder community meeting. So I just wanted to let everyone here know that that's in the plan, and we think we're going to start making progress, start converging KubeBuilder into Operator SDK.
That's really wonderful news with regard to being able to reuse the declarative pattern that Justin and Jeff have put so much work into already.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much for.
Yeah, if you can wrap all that stuff in, and then the community can get the benefits of Operator SDK for operators, and they basically look the same, but then you can get the metric stuff. You can get any of the I don't know, specific benefits there. Then even the tooling and UX. That sounds really wonderful.
Yeah, the big benefit we're going for is really, a lot of the upstream work that we haven't had time to work on or basically also include and develop in parallel. It's much easier just to be able to leverage what's already been done. So that's kind of the idea that we had. So we'll be able to contribute more upstream, and then we'll be able to work more on some of our value-added features like the metrics and the Ansible and Helm operators and some of the OLM integrations and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Do you know when that meeting is?
It's I'll put the link in the chat. I think.
Okay, cool.
Let me see if it's tomorrow. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. I don't think it's in that doc.
Sweet. Yeah, I've never joined that call before, so thanks for the link. I think I'll jump on there.
Cool.
Yeah.
That was all I had. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, if nobody else has anything that they want to bring up, I mean, we've pretty much run to the end of our agenda, and we're now just kind of discussing different ideas. It sounds like we've kind of shared a rough plan of some concrete steps that are necessary next. And yeah, we'll keep working on some things. Do we want to talk about a timeline for the installation POC? When would people like to see that? Who wants to work on it? I blocked out some time on my calendar to do a little bit of work, but it's a lot of work.
Should we start by like doing GitHub issues and trying to use some of those sort of project management features to sort of, I feel like we could pick a date, but it would be picking out of thin air.
So next week, Tuesday, right?
Exactly, that's my style, right? Let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe I can open up some GitHub issues describing what needs to be done, and then that'll kind of scope in a timeline. It would be good if, I'm not sure how realistic this is, for the 1.16 cycle, I think getting in an alpha POC into kubeadm would be a good goal. So,
yeah, one of the ones that's come up in COPS is, and I don't know whether you guys have shipped it in kubeadm, is the DNS, the local DNS agent, or the local DNS proxy. As far as I know, no one has yet packaged that other than kubeup. And so that could be a good one. Whereas, like swapping out core DNS is more controversial type thing.
Yeah. It's that was created rather recently, right? Because I didn't see that in the Addons repo until recently.
It's at the beginning of the year, I think, or the end of last year. So yeah, recent-ish.
And was that done for a particular reason, like from some production backstory that somebody had about DNS performance, or?
I think, yes, like a lot of, particularly on one cloud, which is not the one I work for, there are a lot of DNS issues reported, and the fix that most people have come up with, there are a lot of people doing a lot of like investigations into a bunch of things, like kernel versions and all these, and NAT contract issues, all these sort of things. But essentially, the one solution that seems to fix everyone's issues is to run some form of local agent. And so that was what prompted it.
Yeah, I also recall somebody did a talk about like using TCP versus UDP, but there's probably some of that in there.
Yeah,
anyway.
It turns out it's like 4 or 5 different things or it seems like it's 4 or 5 different things. There's kernel issues, there's contract issues, there's TCP versus UDP, there's the behavior of the clouds when it comes to UDP versus TCP, there's DNS retries, all these things sort of compound, and it's just like, or yeah, you could just run a local agent.
And this is why people need to be able to configure their add-ons.
Yes, although I sense this is one that you won't go back, that you won't turn off, but it has a memory costs per node, so maybe you would turn it off.
Yeah. I mean, if you're on a layer 2 network with a bunch of Raspberry Pis, right? Like,
it's pretty good, but yes, that's anyway. It's definitely one that's not on today, and people might want to turn on. How about that?
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. If anyone wants to look at packaging that could be a good thing too. So I doubt that we'll have the time to do so in the next week. So somebody pick it up. Cool. We could probably bring the meeting to a close if nobody else has anything.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.